Hey, all. I'm Michael. I'm Michael Laine, the president of Liftport Group. If you've been listening to these shows, watching these shows for the last 5 months or so, you know that we've got nearly 20 episodes posted. So we're pretty excited about that. Sorry, let me say that again. We've done about 20 episodes. We've got the first four posted at um, DareGreatly, titled DareGreatly on Spotify. So I just heard the first ones this last week. They're terrific. It's funny, even though that I'm the host of the programs, as the host, you're trying to do like four different things at once. And it was cool because the first two that I listened to were, I think maybe the second and the fourth interview that we did. It was with Dr. Roger Lanius. We actually did two because it was so interesting. And even though I was the host for both of those programs, I learned something listening to them that I didn't necessarily catch when I was being the host. So it was really cool. Anyway, I hope that you will go and look for them. I'll post the link here in a moment. So that's big news for us. That's the first four of about 20 episodes. So we'll be posting those pretty quickly. Our new intern, Sing Ki, he's terrific. He is working his way through these audio and video edits. My other intern, Eugene Kim, she's terrific. She's working mostly on a database, CRM, customer relationship management database for us. Yusuf and Sun Ki just started working on our Instagram account, so you'll start to see some of our old imagery. So that's new stuff for us. It's funny, some of these images are 10, 12, 15, 18 years old, but all of them were taken before the dawn of Instagram. So most people have never seen this stuff. So we're making a real commitment into sharing this historic stuff. Lots of robot images, a few carbon nanotube technology development images, mostly focused on the construction of the Earth elevator, where we don't have as many images, certainly not as interesting, of our work focused on the lunar elevator, our current work. There's two more pieces of big news. One I cannot announce yet. I'm waiting for our new client to give me the go ahead, but we have a new client. And so that's going to be a new set of shows. I'm particularly excited about that. I like all of our clients. Like, let's be honest, I like all of our clients. It's really fun. This project is going to be pretty neat. I'm not going to steal their thunder, but I am excited about it. And then the other thing is we had an interview the other day with a reporter that went really well. In the course of that interview, it's a freelance article, so it's going to get shopped around. So I can't tell you where it's going to go or where it's going to where you're going to be able to find it. But it was a pretty good interview. And during the course of it, it was done by a guy who has interviewed us before. And I don't want to name names because I want him to get the credit for it when his article comes out. But he's got a pretty strong physics background, and he wanted to know, what the status of our lunar elevator efforts were. And as I've been pretty candid here with you, with this audience, during the pandemic, we stopped most of our lunar elevator research. So it does feel good to be getting back into it. I told him there were a lot of changes, a lot of updates. Over the last 3 years, the world has changed pretty dramatically with the very near term, fingers crossed, very near term launch of Starship. That changes our math quite a bit for the better. With several space tug companies operational now, that changes our math for the better. So we're looking to probably do maybe a new updated design for the project. So that could be really exciting. I'm not sure we're able to commit to it just yet, but we've been thinking about this stuff for the last couple of years. So it might be some big changes for us. And I've been saying for a while, I want to get back into the work of working on the lunar elevator. So this is a step in that direction. So it was prompted by a reporter's request, but it was something that's kind of overdue to begin with. So, and I had a good chat with some folks earlier today about that. So those are all kind of, last week was a big week for us in terms of accomplishing stuff, building stuff. We got accepted for a contract for the city of Tacoma. So that was small, but still worthwhile. We're happy to work with them. They're great clients, and some other stuff coming. So with that, I'm going to just jump straight into our show. You know, when we do these, it's kind of one of three formats. Either we have a guest speaker, a guest that we talk to. It could be a news format show, or it could be a space policy show. So it's been pretty quiet on the space policy side of things. There hasn't really been a lot of new stuff lately. And for that matter, it's been pretty quiet when it comes to big news. I don't know that there's anything that I could add that would be very illuminating, right? The news that I'm seeing is the same news you're seeing, and I don't have a lot of analysis or insight to add to it. Pretty happy that Relativity launched last week. Would have been, amazing if they had gone all the way to orbit on their first launch, but still remarkable progress. I'll pull up an article here in a moment, talking about that. Let me actually get there. Sorry, I thought I had this queued up already. There we go. So this is an article out of Gizmodo, and I've always been pretty respectful of Gizmodo. They do good quality articles that go into a fair amount of depth, and I'm really loving what Rocket Lab is doing. And I know I was talking about Relativity. Just give me a second here. I think this is really significant, right? We love what's been going on with SpaceX. It's pretty amazing. Let me share the screen here. We love what's been going on with SpaceX over the last few years. We've seen them crash and then crash and then crash and then succeed in an amazing way. Uh, and their success has changed an entire industry. But we've also seen them do a little bit of uh, you know, price jumps, especially in the last 6 months. And yeah, okay, you can say that that's inflation, and that seems like a reasonable perspective. But for some people, they're kind of the only game in town. So uh, we all know that the American system works best when there's competition. Um, and I'm not saying that Rocket Lab is SpaceX competition yet. I'm saying that they might be, and that there's other organizations kind of in the background working on stuff that could also be competitors to SpaceX. By proving reusable rocketry working in a productive facility, um, it's really made all the other, and there are a lot of other rocket companies, rethink how their processes and their tooling and their planning goes. So it's pretty exciting to see this development. Um, Last week, I was giving some briefings to some congressional staffers and to some folks in the think tank community up in Washington D.C. I didn't go; it was virtual, but the topic was on the Starship and the Starship Singularity and how Congress, how the think tank organizations, how the academia should start to consider the game-changing capabilities of SpaceX's Starship. I think it's such an important idea that we're going to dedicate most of next month on the hope that next month Starship flies. We're gonna dedicate most of next month to Starships. So watch for more of that. But when I was giving that briefing, one of the things I pointed out to them was how uh, Starlink is a vital, and I use that word on purpose, life or death link in the Ukraine conflict after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Um, they used Starlink as a way of communicating with the battlefield. Well, through the very mercurial efforts of the CEO, of Elon Musk, all of a sudden, some of the data capabilities of Starlink were restricted or denied because they were being used in an offensive capacity, and the Ukrainians were fighting back and winning, and they were winning based on that data. So here you've got a private company determining the battle lines of two sovereign nations. Well, that same company has also been entrusted with national defense, national security flights in the United States. And maybe it's a good idea that they don't have monopolistic market control over something as important as launching to space. So, from a purely ideological perspective and a dollars and cents perspective, I think it's really great that Rocket Lab and others are starting to compete against SpaceX. Now, it's going to be a while. It's not going to be an overnight thing. But this article is really quite fascinating. It's from, quotes from their CFO. Position Neutron to compete directly with the Falcon 9. I mean, I gotta say, I love that. They're looking at a $50 million price tag. SpaceX currently is $67 million. I mentioned a moment ago there was some inflation, so they've had a 10% inflation 2 years in a row. I think those are the numbers. Anyway, Falcon 9 started about the 50 million price tag a couple of years ago and has moved up to 67 million. So Uh, good work if you can get it, but I think this is Rocket Lab, squarely facing off against SpaceX. Now, is that a fair comparison? That's a McDonald's Burger King comparison. Sure, they both make good hamburgers, but one is a whole lot bigger than the other. Um, so, let's not get ahead of ourselves with Rocket Lab. However, I think it's really important that they're doing some really cool stuff. And then I really like this. Dr. Greg Autry, he's going to be a guest on our show. So we're happy about that. He's currently a professor at Arizona State University. He's been there for about 2 years now. Prior to that, he was at Cal Berkeley. But in between his University of California gig and his University of Arizona gig, he was on the Trump transition team for NASA to talk about space. And he was one of two very vocal, very credentialed, very successful advocates for commercial space development in the Trump administration. Dr. Autry was considered ultimately the clock ran out on his nomination, but he was considered and nominated to be the chief financial officer of NASA. So with those credentials and as the manager of the Thunderbird School of Management, it's pretty telling when he comes out there and says, hey, Rocket Lab is serious. And if anybody can compete with SpaceX, it's going to be Rocket Lab. So it's just really cool to see that. They're not lifting the same amount of capacity. One is about half, 60% of the other. So, that's not trivial, but, they're aiming to launch 10 to 20 times per rocket. So, if you can get 10 flights out of a $50 million price tag, that's $500 million per vehicle. That's a good ROI. That is a really good return on investment. And if they're able to go to their extreme level of 20 flights per vehicle, $1 billion in revenue per rocket. That's pretty good. I'm pretty impressed with that. Frankly, I had no idea they were that aggressive. So that's really cool to see. This graphic is just like every other space rocket graphic out there right now, given its diameters. And that they're aiming for 20 times reuse is pretty awesome. I love that. Now this article immediately goes into, well, Musk is aiming for $1 million per launch on Starship. I have a hard time believing that. That would be amazing, but I remain a little skeptical of that. And Autry comes in with his background. He says, probably that's a lot further off than advertising, than advertised. Musk delivers amazing stuff. And so we'll see what happens. If you've watched this show, listen to this show at all, you know that I don't really like equating the person of Elon Musk to the company of SpaceX. I have a lot of faith and confidence in Gwen Shotwell at SpaceX. When I mentioned a moment ago, the policy differences between Starlink and how to use it, it was pretty clear that that was an Elon Musk decision, not a company of SpaceX decision. And there's references to that. So it's pretty neat to see this. It's pretty neat to see these changes in the industry. I'm a big fan of Starship. I really wonder what we're going to see when that comes online. And this article kind of goes into a little bit more depth, comparing Blue Origin, United Launch Alliance, Firefly, Relativity, and ABL. So there's definitely other folks in this game. I know that we're having some concern over Virgin Orbit and what's going on with Virgin. If I had to guess, I think Virgin's gonna. My hunch is that they're going to have a white knight deal come from somewhere from somebody. It's got far too many assets to just let it go stagnant and go fallow. So I suspect somebody's going to come in and write a pretty big check for a lot of value in that company. So fingers crossed there. But what I said to the congressional briefing was Starship is not the only game in town. SpaceX is not the only game in town. But what that company has proven is that reusability is the key to the future. And all of these companies are trying to rush to take advantage of that. So pretty impressed by this, pretty happy. I'd like to see all of these companies thrive. I think that would be terrific. And with that, I'm going to actually switch gears to some of the market reporting. Hey, Michael Mealing. Nice to have you here. I don't know if you saw the text that I sent you, but I was kind of hoping you were going to be on the show today and not just on the edges writing in the chat. So please check your messages and get back to me. Okay. Let's see. Let me switch gears. I want to point out another set of articles. This one was written by Andreessen Horowitz. I'm going to post both of them here back to back. Just give me a second here. And I'm going to point out this article that Mealing just posted here. I'm a pretty big fan of Frank White. Let me look that one up. Okay, let me get back to this Andreessen Horowitz report. So this came out. You can scan it to the bottom here. It came out in December 22, so not that long ago, really, just a quarter away. And I think it's interesting. First of all, for those that don't know, Andreessen Horowitz is one of the big premier VCs, venture capital companies in Silicon Valley. I don't know this author. I'm actually going to look this up. But their section on American dynamism is pretto fascinating. They've basically said, look, what is America really, really good at by comparison to the rest of the world? And then that's the area that they're going to spend money on. And I just think that's fascinating all by itself. But he wrote this article He wrote this article last year, at the end of last year, and then a lot has happened since then. Sorry. Okay. Michael, I cannot respond to you. I'm sorry. I'll ping you and we'll get a different date. At the beginning of the show, I think you weren't on the call for it yet, but we had a postponement for the guest that was supposed to be here tonight. So I had an opening. So just as by way of explanation, no need to feel embarrassed about it, man. It was very short notice. So let me just get back to this. So Andreessen Horowitz is a pretty interesting organization. They've been around for a long time. They're very credentialed. It was news to me that they were starting to dabble in the space sector. I actually didn't know that until recently. And then why are they doing this, right? I'm just going to read their quote because I think this is kind of great. Breaking into a new world is incredibly dangerous and expensive and often necessitates a multitude of discoveries along the way simply for survival. It's because of this inherent risk that these endeavors are so often initially supported by governments, like how the Spanish monarchy sponsored Christopher Columbus's voyages. As with the early explorers of America, these first treks into space were funded by centralized powers. For America, beating the Russians to the moon was perhaps as important to winning the ideological battle of the Cold War as New World exploration was the European power struggles. I think that's pretty interesting. And this last line, through immense effort, landing on the moon broke open a new world. I think that's kind of fascinating. And he goes into a lot of rationale for space. What we're going to build out there, outposts and infrastructure. And again, a lot of use of old historic data to back up a new reality, with where we are. I don't really love some of his examples. I'll be candid here. Jamestown leveraged a competitive advantage in the New World to sell goods to the old. Yeah, okay, that's cool. I don't know if that analogy holds up as clearly as it did in Jamestown. Z-band fiber optic has been talked about for a long time. There is some developments on it. Redwire's been doing some work on this for a long time. Like, it's going to happen. Last week, Monday, Raphael Rojan with the E2MC venture firm out in Switzerland talked about how they've just become an investor with an in-house investment of their VC, investor in residence type program, where they're going to do 3D printing of human organs on orbit. So yeah, that's coming, but we're a long ways from making the claim that this is the new Jamestown. So I like where he's going with it, and I admire his article, but I do definitely see that there's a little bit of like starry-eyed dreamer wish fulfillment in some of this article. So just kind of, don't take it at face value, like dissect it a little bit. But this is a pretty good article. I think it's worthwhile. I do think that this supply chain in space is super useful. It's the thing that kind of rescued the article in my eyes. So I'm going to kind of zoom into that for a moment. This idea of a cislunar economy or the cislunar econosphere has been around for a long time. I'll post the link to the original article. A guy named Murphy came up with it. It was pretty cool. Here's a link. It's a 2-part article, definitely worth a read. And this article, this idea of this economy in space, off-world economy, I think that's really important. And it's something that the congressional briefing the other day, they didn't necessarily understand that this was a big deal. They didn't know that this was going to be a thing. So some of these people are caught very, very off guard by this. Now, this activity section, communications, mobility, service and assembly, manufacturing, I think those are right on track. I would probably add in a sensing capability. I guarantee you one of the first big clients in all of this is going to be U.S. Space Force and other nations looking at what the military calls space domain awareness and the civilian world calls situational awareness, space situational awareness. So, but this article I think is really solid. I'm looking at their L1 position here. Nothing on this chart has L1 as that's the only thing that's going to be there. And so, with considering our lunar elevator, I think we're going to have a role in communications, in mobility, in ports, fuel depots, garages, robotic servicing, communications, manufacturing, and power. So this, I think, is pretty big. I think if you look at this and say, okay, everything is centered on geo, that is true today. I don't think that's going to stay true. It's going to take a while, maybe 10, 15 years, but I think a lot of this stuff is going to move out to L1 just based on delta V equations, if nothing else. So I'm going to see this section kind of grow. That's my prediction. But it's a good article. It's a good map of the future, and they talk about some developments along the way. This picture, and there's another one with a herd of elk. I'm not kidding. There's one with a herd of elk in a park that Blue Origin puts out. I kind of hate these pictures. I mean, I really do. I understand why people draw pictures like this, but this feels like a world that's too far away. That your great grandchildren are going to be a part of, and I don't think that's true. I don't think we're going to have to wait, 1,000 years or 500 years or something for to have an active civilization in space. So I don't really like pictures like this. I think they actually harm our industry more than they help us. But I understand why they do it, because they think that this is inspiring. For me, it's just merely annoying. I think I'm going to skip on to the next one. This article is really worth reading. So I want to encourage you. I want to talk about this piece here. So he's talking about a space race in November 22, and it was December 22 that the U.S. government issued their strategy for cislunar development, and they point blank say that we're going to have the first long-term settlement on the moon. And to me, that was the official beginning of a space race where America throws down the gauntlet and says, we're going to be first to do this stuff. So, yeah, I think it's definitely coming. I think it's going to be really important. And then the last thing in this particular article I wanted to point out, Um, this map looks an awful lot like a map from a U.S. Space Force Major McLean, Sean McLean, uh, wrote out the protect and defend space lines of commerce. I don't know the source for this image. I was looking for it, but it looks an awful lot like the document from Major McLean. It is prettier graphics, but the meat of it looks really similar. And I'll point out there's a lot of stuff going on at the Lagrange point. We have an image like this as well, although it's not this pretty, showing the various delta V's from point A to point B. So this is kind of an argument for why there is a Space Force in the first place, that there's this much commerce, this much activity, this much national and international wealth does kind of have a, defend the space lanes in the same way that the Navy defends the shipping lanes and the ports of the world. So pretty interesting stuff. I'm going to stop sharing this one and move on to the other document here. Let me see. Okay, I'm reading Michael Mealing's quote. Here's a key aspect of the A16Z view that makes that article make sense. With sufficient capital, you can cause these things to actually happen, whereas doing it piecemeal with small capital will never work. You have to will the market into existence. I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. This is expensive stuff to do. I think, Mealing, you and I have had this conversation before, but for the rest of the folks, I had the honor and the privilege of sharing some pretty important insights with the chief scientist of the U.S. Space Force. He's a pretty brilliant guy. His name is Dr. Joel Mosier. And one of, not my first interaction, but an early interaction, this is the challenge coin I got from him. I was pretty happy about this. That's kind of a big deal to me. One of the early interactions I had with him was maybe in the first or second year of U.S. Space Force, and Space Force's budget was still pretty small, $4 billion, $7 billion, something like that. And I pointed out to him that private capital going into low Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit was actually higher than Space Force's entire combined budget. And he did not believe me. He did not believe me. And I almost lost credibility with him, except I was able to jump on a Space Capital report. I think it was Space Capital, but maybe it was Bryce, or maybe it was Euroconsult. But I was able to jump in and say, look, here's the actual data for the amount of money going into this sector. And the private sector was putting more money into space than Space Force's entire budget. So kind of a big deal. Kind of a big deal. So you're right, Michael. It's going to take a lot of money to do some of this stuff. It is coming. It is 100% happening. And there's year by year, quarter by quarter, the amount of money going into space is getting larger and larger and larger. And that was true even during the pandemic. The pandemic saw lots of investment in other places contract, but space got more money than it ever had before, and a lot more attention. So pretty cool to watch that unfold. Moving on to this most recent article, same person, this is just a few days ago. I think it was March 17th, so last week. They took the information that they had before and decided to go into some details. So here's the first article. So he's like, "Hey, go take a look at this, and then dig in." I love this. I love this chart. This makes me very, very happy, right? Not all of these are American companies. This one, Skyrora, is launching out of Scotland, of all things. I can't read what this one is, so I don't know its location. Stoke is actually out here in the Seattle region, not Seattle, but Spokane, the other side of the state. I think ISAR is Indian, and I don't know who iRocket is. But pretty amazing that there's this many at all, right? Nearly 20 companies, 16 and 3. That's amazing to me. And it's not the only game in town. Now, because this is American Dynamism, I'm going to assume that's an American company. I really did think that was Israelis, or not Israel, Indian, so I might be wrong on that one. I had a conversation with Rick Tomlinson, one of the co-founders of the Space Frontier Foundation, co-founder of an asteroid mining company, Deep Space Industries, co-founder of Mir Corp that temporarily leased Mir from the Soviets as a space station, a private space station. That's a pretty untold story. So I was talking with Rick Tomlinson a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was 6 weeks ago, and he was saying, out of 200 companies that we're aware of, maybe 10% of them will succeed. Well, there's 19 on this list alone, and that doesn't count the many companies coming out of Asia, many companies coming out of Europe. So I pushed back and said, I think it's triple that. I think the world's going to have 40 or 60 launch kit companies. So we'll see how that goes. I'm curious. This one, though, I don't even think this does this one justice. I think there's a lot more companies than this doing connectivity, remote sensing. We're really good at satellites and launch at this point. I've been talking about the grand architecture for space for quite a while now. And one of my arguments is, let's not even talk about rocketry or satellites anymore, because that's a known part of the ecosystem at this point. So yeah, great, people are doing it, they're doing really cool things, but I feel like we're there now. I can look at this list and point out companies who've got $100 million, $200 million contracts. Space Force today issued $900 million worth of contracts. So these folks in this area, they're doing fine, right? I don't know all these companies. In fact, I only know a fraction of these companies. But in general, I would say they're all doing just fine. I'm not going to get into the stories about some of these. Farther down the value chain is manufacturing, and I think that's really interesting. It's curious. I would have put gravitics in a different category because I think they're building spaceports. This guy, Tom Murata, used to be an intern of mine when he was 23 years old. So super excited to see how he's growing. But this whole sector pretty much couldn't have existed 10 years ago. Like everything on this list probably could not have existed 10 years ago. This company came out of a accelerator in Colorado Springs, maybe just 3 years ago, something like that. So this whole section is brand new. And I think that's super fun to see. We've had these folks at our meetings. We've had them on our show a couple times. So this whole, you can kind of see if you follow the, you're like, okay, launch, we're good at launch, we're good at satellites. Okay, now we're moving down, up this value chain. Manufacturing is harder, software, and now we're kind of getting into in-space services, and you've got space tugs and monitoring and mining and rovers. Astrobotic and Intuitive are going to land on the moon here pretty soon in a few more. Well, I was about to say weeks, but it's a little further than that. The Japanese group is going to land probably the end of April, so 4 weeks away, something like that. Pretty remarkable. Notice there's a whole lot less companies here. We've watched these folks grow with us for a while now. They're classmates of mine at ISU, as are these folks. These folks grew out of Momentous, kind of an untold story. These folks grew out of the Space Frontier Foundation. I didn't see NanoRacks, so maybe I haven't seen them yet, but they also came out of Space Frontier Foundation and a couple others. Some of these companies have been incubated at various. I think these folks came out of the Founders Institute program, so that's pretty cool. Dr. Maura Burjak got $1 million Genius Award from the MacArthur Foundation. He got that about 4 months after being tapped by Steve Wozniak of Apple co-founder fame to build a orbital debris mitigation program. Scout, also the group that came out of the Space Frontier Foundation events. So yeah, pretty cool to see this stuff starting to really, really grow. And I guess I would have expected to see NanoRacks here, but maybe NanoRacks is under Voyager. Maybe that's how they're doing it. Okay, maybe that's what's going on. So it's just kind of neat to see this stuff growing and changing and adding and capabilities expanding. There's about 10 of these companies that are maybe 10 that are publicly traded, not just financed through VC. So I really recommend reading this map. So this article and the other one that preceded it are pretty useful to get. Oh, thank you. iSpace went to low lunar orbit. The Orphans of Apollo, I just found out today, might be more publicly available stories. So fingers crossed on that. That's going to be, hopefully there's some good news on that front. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and close down. We only have about 10 minutes left, but I kind of covered the things I really want to cover today. It's been, I won't say it's been a quiet news week, but it's kind of nice to see how stuff is growing and building over time. With that, I'm going to close out. We've got some great guests coming up. We've got some folks coming in from Rogue Aerospace. Namrata Goswami is part of a. She's an independent scholar, but spends a lot of time talking to think tanks. We've got, gosh, I'm suddenly drawing a blank. You'd think after all this time I would have, I'd have the list in front of me. It looks like Michael Mealing's going to join us. We can't have you in next week because we're booked, but we'll have you in soon after that. So that'll be good. All right. With that, have a great night, y'all. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming by.